All right, welcome. Let's get started here. So first of all, just a couple things before we get started. If you have any questions at any point during the webinar, feel free to raise your hand or type your question. There'll be time at the end for questions, so if you just wanted to hold your question until then, that's fine. If you want to raise your hand at any point, I can unmute you and you can ask your question, whether you're on the phone or using a microphone, either way. This webinar is recorded and will be emailed to you after the conclusion of the webinar, usually within 24 hours. Also, if you want the PowerPoint, I will actually email those as well. It does say it's attached, but I will actually I will go ahead and email those. All right, just a moment. All right. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to look at some definitions of, the different types of testing materials, where to find reviews and information about tests. We'll also look at where to find tests on a topic, where to find the full texts of tests and measures, and we'll also talk about obtaining permissions if you wanted to use a test or measure for your dissertation or for research. Okay, so tested measures are often categorized either as published or unpublished. So published tests generally are commercially available for purchase from a publisher, right? So they're often only bought or can only be bought by qualified or professionally credentialed users. Unpublished or non-commercial, sometimes also referred to as experimental measures or tests, are usually referred to in journal articles, dissertations, reports, etc. They're sometimes published in journal articles or compilation volumes, or they can sometimes be available in databases like CiteTests, but oftentimes they're only available for use by contacting the author. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail in just a moment. So when we're talking about dissertation research or, finding a test or measure to use for dissertation research, I find that most people use either unpublished, experimental, or non-commercial tests. In some cases, people do also use published tests. It just kind of depends. So when you're thinking about identifying a test, you need to consider whether you need a specific test that has been used before with your population. So do you have some flexibility in your choice, or are there as many different tests that measure the same construct, such as, if you're looking at, like, for example, measuring stress or anxiety or pain, you may want to compare various factors of the test to make a selection. So some things that you may want to consider is, of course, the validity and reliability of the test, also previous use in relevant populations. You may also want to even consider readability or language, the length or ease of use. So obviously, if it's a longer measure, is it relevant to the particular population that you're using, or would it be easier to use a shorter test? And of course, cost is a consideration as well. So if you want to use a commercially published test, this is definitely a consideration. These characteristics would be addressed in a test review resource or in the literature describing the development of the test. And we'll talk a little bit more about looking that information up in a moment. But if you want an overview, we can also look at the APA FAQs on finding information about psychological tests. All right. So the library subscribes to 2 databases specifically created to provide information about tests. These include indexing by subject and population, and both point to sources of more information. So psych tests usually includes the full text of the test as well, but not always. And the Health and Psychosocial Instruments database also provides some full text, but not always. So these are really good databases for finding those unpublished or experimental measures. And you can find those under the databases A through Z list. So another way that you could identify a test that meets your criteria is to find an article or research study similar to your study that uses or describes a test on your topic. So this often means that you do have to, construct a thorough literature review. Books and articles which explain how to test the specific persons, phenomena, or variables that interest you will give you a sense for which tests are most typically used by other researchers. So again, you basically want to look at where the research is, right? Or, look at the research on your particular topic and look at what tests and measures they are using to kind of measure what you're looking for. To find a research study that uses a measurement or instrument to answer similar questions to yours will help you sort of identify specific test names. And there's lots of different databases that you can look at depending on sort of the topic, right? So if you're looking for, something that has to do with psychology, neuroscience, psychiatry, and related fields, PsycInfo is an excellent database for that. If you're looking for content in more sort of the health sciences, CINAHL is a really good database for that. If you're looking for content in education, ERIC is a really good database. And then finally, if you're looking for content that's related to sort of more business or organizational leadership management, then a database like ABI Inform Global is a really good resource for that. And finally, of course, ProQuest Dissertations and Theses Global is a really good database if you're just looking for dissertations, right? Because oftentimes dissertations will also include or use a specific measurement or instrument. So if you find a dissertation that touches on some aspect of your topic, you can look at what test or measure they used. So in PsycInfo, to find studies that utilize tests, you can either enter your topic or keywords in the top box, and then also type a string of keywords like test, measure, survey, questionnaire, or scale in the next box, and then make sure that you change the drop down to abstract. And then, of course, you can use other limiters like age group, population, and so forth. If you want to take a look at what that looks like in PsycInfo, I can switch over here to the database. So just a second here while I do that. Sorry, it's taking me just a minute here. Okay, so we're on the library website. And at this point, I can go to PsycInfo. And then here, I can type my topic. So maybe I want to look at anxiety, for example. And then in the next box, I can put in my sort of string of search terms that are related to tests and measures. So it'll look something like this. So you'll notice that I have an asterisk next to each of these. And also I'm stringing this together with the word or. So I'm looking for either test or measure or survey or questionnaire scale, either one. And with the asterisk, what that means, it's either like test or testing. It sort of takes the root of the word and will pull up results that include any permutations of that word. So I'm going to change this to abstract, as I described earlier. I'm also going to change this to anywhere except full text. What that means is it's going to look for this word either in the title or the abstract or the indexing details. All right. So basically that's one way to do it. And as you scroll through these different articles, if you go to the abstract or the details, actually that's a dissertation. I'm going to go ahead and limit this to scholarly journals first. Obviously, I'll have to narrow this down, right? Anxiety is a really broad topic. Definitely want to narrow this down. So if you go to the abstract or the details, if it does include a test or measure, it'll be included in the test or the details here. Now this is probably the kind of slowest way to, oh, here we go. So here we have one where we have the tests and measures used in this particular study. So they use the trait anxiety disorder or inventory, I'm sorry, it's a long day, and hospital anxiety and depression scale. So that's basically how you would sort of do the research on, basically other studies and see if what, measures or tests they're using to measure kind of what you're looking for. So that's one way to do it. All right. Back to my slides here. So in PsycInfo, you can also look up tests and measures. And there's a field actually within PsycInfo where you can do that. So again, I'm going to go back to the PsycInfo database where we just were. And I'm sorry, I'm having a little computer issues here, so I'm a little slow. Okay, so we're back in PsycInfo, and I'm going to go to the advanced search. And this time, I'm going to go down here to where it says test and measure, and then look up tests and measures. So you can do this a couple different ways. You can either use a particular word here, like let's say anxiety or something like that. Hopefully you want to do something a little more specific. Otherwise, you can also look up tests and measures here. So you'll notice you have either contains or begins with. And then here are all the tests and measures that have anxiety somewhere in the title. You'll notice too that it gives you a count for how many articles are in the database that use that particular test or measure. So you'll notice a lot of these are just in there one time. If you're looking for a test or measure for your dissertation, you probably want to look at tests or measures that are, maybe used more than once, right? Because that might provide more reliability or validity for that particular test or measure. Yeah. So that just kind of gives you an idea. Like for example, this one right here, it's an anxiety about aging scale, and it looks like it's in 30 different articles here. So if I wanted to look at that, I can click on this little check mark and then click add to search. So now I'm searching for this particular scale. I can take this off now if I just wanted to look at those 30 articles. So basically every single one of these, if you look at the abstract or the details, you'll notice that that is one of the measures that they used in that particular study. So that can be really helpful. Any questions so far? PsycInfo is probably one of the better databases when it comes to finding tests or measures. So if the concept that you need to or that you want to measure has anything to do with psychology, this is definitely the go-to database. All right. Let's go back to our slides. I just want to make sure that okay, so we just did that. All right. So you can also look at test reviews in library databases. We have two databases where you can find commercially published tests. So that would be the Mental Measurements Yearbook, which provides reliability and validity information and reviews of commercially published tests. And then there's also the Health and Psychosocial Instruments database that points you to reviews of tests in other sources. Test reviews can also be found in journal articles. So you can also use databases like PsycInfo, CINAHL, or ERIC, where you can find information about the validity or reliability of a particular test. And this is really good if you're looking for, for example, the reliability or validity of a test that is not commercially published. So, so obviously a database like Mental Measurements Yearbook would not be the best source if you're looking at like unpublished or experimental measures. So articles often do contain evaluations or reviews of commercially published or unpublished tests. You can use validity or reliability as key terms when you're searching for a particular measure. So for example, in this screenshot, I have the school anxiety inventory, and then I searched for validity or reliability, I think in PsycInfo. All right, so the next thing is, once you've identified what surveys or measures you want to use, you want to then find it, right? So there's several different places that you can find actual measures. Of course, we do have some commercially published measures here at the Chicago School, and you can look on our website under Discover and Tests and Measures to find out what we have. Otherwise, published tests must be purchased from the publisher, and you can find the publisher information by searching for the test name in the Mental Measurements Yearbook. A couple other places where you can find actual measures is PsycTests. PsycTests is actually a really great database for finding those unpublished or experimental measures. Usually those are tests or measures that originally appeared in journal articles and were never commercially released. The DSM-5 online assessment measures are also available. These are patient assessment measures that were developed to be administered at the initial patient interview and to monitor treatment progress. So that's another resource that's available. Also, you can often find tests or measures within articles. They're often found in the appendix. So again, you can use databases like PsycInfo, ERIC, or CINAHL to find those. And you can also find them within dissertations, also found usually within the appendices. Can be a little tricky to find those. So to find tests or measures within articles in PsycInfo, for example, you can always Enter the name of the test in the search box by putting the title in quotes, and then change the field to tests and measures, just as I have in the screenshot here. In the second search box, you can use the word appended, and then run your search. Look at the resulting entries carefully, since the study might have used more than one test and may not have appended all of them to the article. So that's kind of a little caveat there. You can also use the tests and measures field that I showed you earlier in the advanced search. Oftentimes, if a test or measure is appended, it'll say appended in that list where you can browse the tests and measures. Also, within ProQuest dissertations and theses, oftentimes you have a scale or measure appended to them. You can use keywords along with words like test, measure, scale, inventory, just as we did earlier with PsycInfo. So for example, if you were looking for, I don't know, like depression or suicide, and then you add that with keywords such as test or scale or measure. You can then check the abstracts of the results to see if the author has used a scale, and then check the table of contents in the dissertation to see if there's an appendix which includes the scale. That's definitely a little more work. I find that most people, when they're looking for tests or measures, don't have to sort of dig through dissertations or theses, but it is a method that is available, and sometimes we do find tests or measures that way. Other places to search for tests or measures, you can always Google. Some tests are freely available on the internet, so it's always worth to try and look for a test online. Google even has a few pointers on how to run an advanced search, which I actually have linked here. So once you get the copy of this PowerPoint, you can actually click on that link and it will take you to those pointers. You can also use the same pointers for a Google Books search. Google Books does a keyword search of all of the books that Google has digitized. And oftentimes that includes, you know, tests or measures that are available actually full text in these sort of compilation volumes. And that collection also includes many full text journals as well. Another place to search, which is kind of interesting, is this tests and measures in the social sciences website. It's compiled at the University of Texas in Arlington. And it's an index of full text measures that are published in print books. Or we also call them compilation volumes. There's quite a bit actually that is available through these print volumes. And you can search through all of them actually in this link here. So measures found in this index can be requested through our interlibrary loan services. Just be sure to request the section, not the entire book, because we can't usually get the entire book right now through interlibrary loan. And really, you don't really need that. You're just looking for the particular section in that particular book that has the measure that you're looking for. So I've definitely found a few tests that way. If you still can't find the measure that you're looking for, sometimes the only way to get it is to contact the author. And this is actually very common. We find that a lot of people who are working on their dissertation and need a particular measure, you know, sometimes that measure just isn't available anywhere. It hasn't been published in an article. It's not available in psych tests. It's not available in a compilation volume. You'll just have to contact the author. Oftentimes, to find the author information, at least you can find that within the article if it's referenced, if you know the author published an article on that measure. Sometimes even just Googling the author can be helpful. But you can also ask a librarian at the Chicago School Library. We're more than happy to help you track down an author's contact information if you cannot find that. All right, so once you've identified a measure that you want to use and you actually find it, you need to also obtain permissions. So both published and unpublished tests are under copyright. So if you plan to use tests in your published research, including dissertations, you have to get permission from the copyright holder. And in fact, you probably won't pass IRB unless you have those permissions as well. So they usually look for that. For published tests, you'll need to contact the publisher to purchase the test or obtain permission to use it. Some published tests can only be administered by authorized parties, so you have to make sure and check with the test publisher to find out if you're qualified even to administer that test. Many publishers now also send requesters to the Copyright Clearance Center at copyright.com. There's usually a form now that you can fill out where you can just put the journal title, or all the other information in the search or in the pay per use box. So usage for thesis or dissertation usually falls under republish or display content. For unpublished tests, you'll also need to obtain permission from the author or the copyright holder of the test. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work to find out who is the copyright holder. It's not always the author. And you'll also have to get permission even if the entire test is available in an article, book, or website. So generally speaking, actually, if the article, or if the test or measure is published in an article, book, or in an article or a book, usually it's enough to just contact the publisher for that article or book. If it's a website, oftentimes it'll even say on the website who's the copyright holder. Your librarian can also help if you can't find the author or copyright holder of a test. Finally, if you're obtaining permission from the author, which again, like oftentimes is necessary, and you're not sure what to say in your letter or email, usually it's an email, you can always ask your faculty. They can help you come up with the appropriate language to use. Be sure that the subject heading of your email is descriptive and that the email itself, of course, is written in professional language. Most of the time when asking for permission from an author, you just want to tell them about your research, right? So tell them what you're using it for, what is the context, and so forth. Most authors are actually more than willing to share the test or measure with you. They just like to track kind of where it's used, and also they usually like some kind of follow-up, like what results and so forth that you have. All right, so that's basically it. I know that was a really quick rundown of all of the sort of different aspects of finding tests and measures. At this point, does anybody have any questions? Anything I need to sort of go back into the databases to show you kind of more step-by-step how to find the information? Are you looking for a particular test or measure at this point? I'm more than happy to help clarify anything that we talked about during the webinar. And again, you can either raise your hand or type your question. Well, all right, so it doesn't sound like there are any questions. I hope this was helpful. Of course, if you have any questions later about any aspect of finding test or measures, you're more than welcome to email us or schedule an appointment. It's pretty easy to schedule an appointment with a librarian. If you go to the library website, you just have to go to the Find Help and then Meet with a Librarian, and then choose the date and time that you want to meet. It's very easy. We use Zoom. We use screen sharing, and generally we're very experienced with helping students both identify tests or measures and find actual tests and measures, or again, obtain permissions. All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a great night. Thanks.